Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Earlier this week, the Court of Appeal quashed a development order by DBKL to develop Taman Rimba Kiara in Taman Tun Dr. Ismail. TTDI residents had protested for more than 5 years against the proposed development, in which several blocks of high-end apartments had been approved by DBKL. Joining us on the show tonight, we have Hannah Yeoh, MP of Segambut. Taman Rimba Kiara is part of her constituency. Good evening, Hannah. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Now, TTDI is seen to be a mature and affluent neighborhood. And for many outside of the Klang Valley, this case was perceived to be TTDI residents using their influence and power and resources to preserve their neighborhood and their quality of life. This going up against an equally rich developer and its allies. Now, maybe you can help shed some light as to what were the public interest and social justice dimensions in this case.
So when I was elected in 2018, at the time, development order had already been given to the developer. So this is original Taman Rimba Kiara, 12 acres of the land given through the BN government to Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan. At that time, the chairman of Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan was Tengku Adnan. Every FT chairman will become the chairman of Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan. So they entered into a joint venture with the developer to develop part of Taman Rimba Kiara on that land in the name of providing housing for the 98 longhouse residents. So when I came in, the residents were already in court fighting this case against the development order. And so for me at that time, we tried to engage the new FT minister, Khalid Samad, to see whether or not Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan could cancel this. But we were not able to come to an agreement simply because Khalid Samad felt at that time that scaling it down by half the proposed development was good enough. And he was very concerned about reimbursement back to the developer. And also, I think what's most important is the TTDI residents and myself, we really tried everything we could to come out with an alternative housing model for the longhouse residents. So we felt the best option would be to provide upgrade their existing housing, landed property on 4.4 acres because it's just 98 families. Instead of moving them out from their existing plot, building affordable housing, one block of apartment and putting them there, and at the same time then building this huge high-end condo. Yeah.
So, Hannah, was the public interest dimension of this case then to do with the longhouses or the rumah panjang dwellers? Was it about that, about fighting for the longhouse dwellers against property developer, or was it about the green lung but preserving, this part of the environment and not giving way to development?
Both. The longhouse residents deserve permanent housing at their site because they have been there since 1980s. And at the same time, we must protect Taman Rimba Kiara as it is. So no extra, acres given to any proposed new development.
Hannah, it seemed to me that the issue of the longhouses was a bit of a red herring when it was brought up, because what seemed to be motivating many of the stakeholders was this the 3 billion ringgit gross development value of the project and the anticipated 160 million ringgit that was going to accrue to the Yayasan as a consequence. Isn't that really the heart of it? Not the dwellers, not the longhouse dwellers, but really profits from this project.
That is why I think every Malaysian needs to read the judgment of the Court of Appeal, because the Court of Appeal decision unmasks everything, every narrative that they try to put up, that it is to help the longhouse residents and in exchange, for 12 acres of Taman Rimba Kiara to be developed. And so I'm so pleased that the Court of Appeal dealt with all this myth that they were trying to put out. I mean, at one point, they organized protests of the Longhouse residents in front of PMO, and they turned this into almost like a racial issue, to say that I only cared for the Taman Tun, the rich people. I did not care about the Longhouse resident. And that was a blatant lie, because on our team, which we have engaged, we have Longhouse residents on our side, and they felt that the best option for them kind of housing is to have landed properties on their existing site.
Right. And I want to ask you about that, because this case took so long to fight out in court, and it was more than 5 years. The question of whether justice is only available to those who have the financial means to fight long battles in court. I mean, this was definitely something you had a very resource, with financial firepower of developer going against residents of TTDI. Is that the case? Is that we're only going to see cases like this for residents who have the means to fight it out in court?
It definitely cost the residents a lot of time, energy, and also money to fight this at the Court of Appeal. But I am thankful that the community really came together to help one another. I just want to share with you a very touching moment when we organized a town hall to update the residents. I was told that the nearby mosque made an announcement to ask residents, young and old, to come and attend the town hall because this is their bid to help save the park. And I saw the coming together of the community, and at every point, the TTDI residents were there, every single festival, to want to invest into the Longhouse residents. Is really the whole model of Kita Jaga Kita. And I think it's a blatant lie to say that every TTDI resident is rich. I saw a lot of retirees, people who have to sacrifice their time and their savings to fight this case out. And I'm very thankful to the legal team. I think Prof. Gurdial and Christopher Leong and the other lawyers really helped us a lot.
Hannah, in the judgment that you say everyone should read, and I agree with you, because it does bring up some very important issues around conflicts of interest, which are in our institutions, this duty to provide reasons for decisions made, that you can't simply make a decision without actually having a stated reason, and that in many ways, those who run DBKL, seem to be either ignorant or unwilling to adhere to plans like the KL structure plan, that they seem to not think that this was part of their duty. Do you think we'll see, as a consequence of this case, reforms within those institutions that were the main stakeholders in this case?
Definitely, this is a landmark decision, and I know that DBKL from now onwards will have to take objections of the residents seriously and engagement of the stakeholders in its purest form, and not just sending out notices, but actually not taking into account the actual objections that come with those notices. Also, in this case, we turn to a lot of other institutions, for example, the MACC, and the MACC was exploring on conflict of interest, but nothing really came out of that. And moving forward now, I hope that DBKL will not appeal this decision, because as you can see, the public interest and there is great celebration when everybody heard that Taman Rimba Kiara's development order has been revoked. And so for this now, we want to focus on resolving the housing issue for the Longhouse residents, and I hope Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan will take the PAC report, because PAC in Parliament also found similar findings. There is conflict of interest when the mayor of DBKL also sits in Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan, and I hope that new FT Minister Anwar Musa will listen and pay attention to what the KL people want.
Oh, Sharaad brought up the KL structure plan, and I'm wondering, maybe you can provide us some insight as to how the government, is thinking about development versus environment preservation. Is there a strategy or an approach that we can see to this? Because as we know, developers are a very powerful lobby. How are we thinking about urbanization and development vis-a-vis the environment?
The problem in Malaysia is, in writing, we have all the perfect documents. They are there, but no one is following them. And that's why I think moving forward, when you already have the KL plan, you really need to ensure that every single committee, conversion of land use, the cabinet in alienating land to entities, you really need to pay attention to what is written in these gazetted documents. You have to honor and respect, because they have spent a lot of money preparing these documents. And the mess that we have in Kuala Lumpur today is a result, not because of lack of proper documents like this, but a lack of enforcement and also follow through to follow strictly what has been passed.
Hannah, you brought up, and I think it was reported in the media that you were quite disappointed with a lot of institutions, and also, the minister at that point in time. I mean, I think one of the issues that the Malaysians now, having been through, a Barisan National Government, a Pakatan Harapan government, and now a Perikatan National Government, the issue of whether there is a consensus on values. And I'm thinking today of what is happening with the Selangor state government's almost hell-bent on pushing through the degazetting of the North Kuala Langat Forest Reserve. Does PH, I mean, you are from Pakatan Harapan as a coalition, do you have a coherent view of the environment and the one which speaks with a single voice about these issues? Because it seems that it's very schizophrenic on the PH side of the aisle.
How do I say this? I think every politician owes a duty, not just to the current voters, but the generations to come. And this is what I have observed. I understand Khalid Samad's dilemma at that time, because he was worried about compensation, because he inherited a lot of this Tengku Anand's decision when he came on board. But I think there must be a time when elected politicians do not just look at the value of money, but hold on to what is true and what is right, not just for current batch of voters, but the children to come. And it's not easy in Kuala Lumpur and Selangor to find green area anymore. We really need to ensure that it is the last resort before we touch any inch of this green area. And there is no justified reason, no matter how you try to argue it out, to build more condos at the expense of green area. We have enough
Hannah?
condos everywhere in Kuala Lumpur. Yes.
Hannah, do you feel,
Melisa.
I take your point about the property overhang. You're definitely right. There is more than enough condos in the KL and Klang Valley area. What is your position on the North Kuala Langat Forest Reserve? Do you support the degazetting of that area?
Of course not. I live in Selangor, but I'm no longer a representative in Selangor. So I need to look into the details of the case, but I definitely think that we should, every Harapan government need to ensure that we do our best. We need to be different from the PN administration or Perikatan Nasional.
All right, Hannah, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. We really do appreciate your time and you sharing your experiences in this case. We're going to take a quick break on Consider This, but we'll be back and we'll speak to the lead counsel for the TTDI residents after this. Stay tuned.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 7.45 lebih awal dari biasa.
Terkini berwajah baru.
Ini pula susulan khas pesawat Back Air di Kazakhstan. Pesawat berkenaan dilaporkan tergelincir 2 kali.
Notifikasi berita terkini dan navigasi mudah. Podcast dikemas kini dengan berita dan program.
Rebirth, Reformasi, Resistance and Hope.
Serta video tanpa had dengan scroll tanpa henti. Buat turun aplikasi baru Astro AWANI sekarang.
Kegagalan Kerajaan Persekutuan tunai janji melaksanakan projek baik pulih sekolah daif turut diulas Menteri Muda Pendidikan dan Penyelidikan Teknologi Dr. Anwar Rapai.
COVID-19, 2 lagi kes disyaki atau PUI direkodkan di Sarawak.
So hopefully kita akan mendapat kedudukan yang lebih baik di masa-masa akan datang.
Udang geragau atau bubuk dalam bahasa tempatan terkenal sebagai bahan utama dalam pembuatan belacan atau cencaluk.
Amanah di tangan kita. Adat, budaya dan semangat menjadi kesinambungan perpaduan tanah air yang tercinta. Berteraskan adab yang terpahat di jiwa dan raga. Marilah bersama kita membina negara Malaysia.
Asrama Mahat Tahfiz Jawaban.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 7.45 lebih awal dari biasa.
Kini berwajah baru.
Ini pula susulan khas pesawat Back Air di Kazakhstan. Pesawat berkenaan dilaporkan tergelincir 2 kali.
Notifikasi berita terkini dan navigasi mudah.
Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan. Let's continue our discussion about the Taman Rimba Kiara dispute that pitted powerful developers against the protection of a green lung and the public good. Earlier this week, the Court of Appeal quashed a development order for a proposed high-rise project in the area. Joining us now, we have the lead counsel for the TTDI residents, Datuk Dr. Gurdial Singh Nijar. Welcome to the show. Now, the Court of Appeal's landmark decision on the Taman Rimba Kiara case, it has been called a landmark decision because of its legal significance. Maybe you can help us understand what elements in this case is precedent setting for, say, future disputes.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you for this opportunity. I think first we must understand the whole ethos of planning law in this country. It is a democratic process whereby there is an interaction between communities and other stakeholders with the authorities about the future of or the direction in which the habitat and the places in and around them are going to be developed. And it's a very democratic process. It's a very consultative process. There are very elaborate mechanisms to ensure that people have their say and that the authorities take their say into account when deciding what kind of permission to give and to whom and in respect of what. So this is the overarching principle upon which this whole case must be understood. So it's what they call a democratic. It's a democratic principle is at the heart of society as reflected in planning law. So with that, let me say there are 5 critical points that in this context decided by the Court of Appeal, which you say makes it a landmark case. The first is who has the right to bring an action in respect of any development in and around a community which may have an impact upon that community, not only for that moment, but also in the future. Now, the High Court decided that the residents in and around the park had no locus standi. They said that the condominium management corporations had no locus standi. The Residents Association had no locus standi. Now, this was repudiated by the Court of Appeal. They said, of course, they have locus standi because they're going to be directly affected, adversely affected, when a park, a city park, a recreational area is then given away for the development of 8 blocks of 45-story condos and so on and so forth. So that was the first issue. The second issue is that you must accord the people who might be affected by the development all rights to be heard on the particular issue itself. And if you do not do that, there will be what you call procedural impropriety, and you can then have any decision that is made, which will be essentially a decision made in breach of natural justice with regard to the people who are going to be affected. So that was the second issue that was decided in favor of those who were challenging, the 10 parties who were challenging this order. Then the third issue, of course, was that there is a structure plan. You see, there is a very elaborate process by which the authorities then draw up a structure plan for the future to guide future development. Now, is this binding? That was the next question. The developers and DBKL said, no, it's not binding. It's only a vision. It only talks about policies and so on and so forth. Again, the Court of Appeal...
You're referring to the KL structure plan, yes?
KL structure plan, yes. KL structure plan. This is under the Federal Territory Planning Act. And they said the structure plan has to be, is a material consideration you must take into account. And if you do not want to follow the structure plan, you must give your reasons. So here, they faulted, they decided in favor of the residents on the ground that the DBKL felt that they did not have, it was not binding, they did not have to take this into account. The court said, no, it's a material consideration. And secondly, if you want to depart from it for any reason, then you should provide that reason to the court for the court to adjudicate whether or not the reason is sufficient for you to depart from that particular plan. We must not forget that this Taman Rimba Kiara was designated as an open space, recreational area, city park, and so on and so forth, you know. And there were no reasons given. And so the court said, first, you have not taken into account the material consideration. And secondly, you have not provided any reason for us to evaluate whether or not you have any reason to depart from the structure plan. Then, of course, there was this whole issue about reasons to be given. The developers, lawyers, as well as DBKL lawyers said that, you know, there is no provision. And the High Court so held, said, oh, you know, there is no provision saying that they must give you reasons as to why or how they treated your objections or your concerns that you have expressed. So there's no requirement, we don't have to give reasons. And the court said, no, this is very critical that you must give reasons because this affects these people. And there is an obligation on your part in terms of good governance to provide the reasons to the public who is going to be directly affected by that particular plan. And the final one, of course... Sorry,
go ahead.
And the final issue, of course, was the question of conflict of interest. You see, what happened is that the Yayasan is a CSR arm. All right, they're supposed to do good corporate social responsibility and so on of the DBKL. They had entered. They got this land. They got
so
the government to give them.
Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan is the CSR arm of DBKL.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Right. So they're supposed to do social good for the community, etc. So what they did was they acquired this particular piece of land and they alienated it for consideration to the developer, Memang Perkasa, which is a subsidiary of Molten, you know, which is a renowned developer. You see their development all over the place. And then they entered into a joint venture agreement. And that joint venture agreement made it very clear that there was an obligation on the part of the Yayasan Wilayah Persekutuan they were going to get money out of that whole development if that development went through, if the development was approved. So this made it clearly a situation of conflict of interest. Now the developer and the DBKL argued that this was a conditional contract, and the person who signed the development order was not the Datuk Bandar and so on. But the court rejected this and said that it's quite clear that there was a commitment upon which there was a commitment by the Yayasan, and they were going to get money if this project was seen through, and we are talking about millions of dollars.
Right.
So they said this is a
right.
very clear case.
I understand the expected. Right. Sorry. I understand the expected profits, as it were going to be the order of 160 million ringgit. Gurdial, it seems like this case has brought to the surface something that we all seem to understand about governance in Malaysia, that it's murky, that it's arbitrary, it's got to do with deals being made behind closed doors, whatever the so-called principles of planning, the ethos, as you mentioned it, is often observed only in the breach, this is largely an old boys club that makes these decisions. Now, is there any way that this court ruling will start a process of change, that governance will become much more transparent after this, that, what has to be put in place for this judgment to have a material effect on governance in this country?
Well, I think the signal that has been sent by the Court of Appeal is very clear, that you cannot, that you have got to adhere to this whole democratic process and to have give credence to the whole consultative process by which planning is going to be shaped in the future, as well as the reasons on the basis of which you are going to give a development order or not give a development order. So this has laid down the ground rules in very clear, explicit terms. And it's now up to the government, up to the authorities to decide that what they should do to adhere to these very clear pronouncements by the. So we hope that this will usher in a change and an awareness. For example, the court said, when you say you don't want to give reasons or you did not communicate the reasons as to the decision that you made when the citizens raised their objections, he said you're hiding the whole thing behind a cloak and allow it to be a mystery to those people who are going to be directly affected by this particular development itself. Right. So the judgment itself is very explicit in making clear that they will not allow the democratic process in which people this is a environmental contract, this is a social contract made between the community, this whole structure plan and local plans and so on, and you cannot just willy-nilly ignore it. So we hope that this will be used as a basis by the authorities to shape up that whole process by which a planning permission is given.
Right, Gurdial, is it premature to rejoice? Is it premature to celebrate victory at the moment, because there's still one final level of appeal left? If DBKL does decide to take this to the apex court, what issues do you expect to be debated then?
Well, I mean, they'll have to get leave before they can leave to appeal, before they can actually appeal. And of course, we will resist it with all the sinews in our fibers that we have. And we will then want this to be, if it all goes up to the federal court finally, we will have to fight on these issues. And our situation is very clear. We want to protect the environment. We want to protect the green lung. We want to protect the democratic process by which people participate in this whole process. Okay. And this is not the only issue. There are so many other cases that are lined up, which some of us as lawyers are kind of committed to taking up. We have a loose network of lawyers called advocates in the public interest. And there are other cases like the Kuala Langat case, the reclamation in Penang, the Orang Asli in Kelantan, and we are also waiting.
we must have you back on to discuss more about environmental law and these cases on the show. I think that merits another whole show by itself. But I want to thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. We really do appreciate your time helping us think through the judgment of the Court of Appeal. Thank you. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, and good night.